Alright, so in this video we're going to go through and edit our main leg block. We're also going to attach our linkages and then we're going to add in other parts to complete the modelling of our leg assembly. So the first thing we want to do is we want to edit our leg assembly. So first of all we need to go in, click leg block, our leg block I should say, and activate it. This means we can work within this, and we're going to go in and we're going to immediately fillet our leg block. So hopefully you've used fillet enough by now that you know how it works slightly, but we're going to add in all of these edges just as we have before with a fillet. And I'm going to make mine 5mm, so I think it gives it a good rounding. Click OK, and then we're also going to add a new fillet, this time a rule fillet, on the front and the back surfaces. Now I mentioned before that you can't select a new surface necessarily, but sometimes it will let you in also if you select, if you hold Control on your keyboard or Command, or if you're on a Mac, you can often select a second face. So rather than putting it to 0 and doing it that way, sometimes that will work as well. So I've now selected both of those faces, and I'm going to make this a 5mm radius. Therefore, we have a nice rounded leg. It looks kind of cool, I hope. I think so. Click OK, and you'll see we have these nice rounded shapes. The next thing we need to do is we need to add in holes for our linkages to connect. I'm going to go through the middle here, and the way we're going to do this is with the hole tool. So I'm actually going to go look on this side. I'm going to select hole, capture position if you need to, and I'm going to create a hole on this surface. So when we're on the normal at point single hole option, all you have to do is select a surface that you want your hole to be on. It will create a hole in that place, and all you have to do is drag it and drop it into the place that you want it to be. Now on Fusion, what it very kindly does is it adds in a reference point for you when you're dragging. So even if we don't have a point or a sketch point as we have before with the hole, if it's a center point or a key point, it will reference it for you. So you might be able to see here that as I'm dragging this around, a little white dot appears in what should be the center of that rectangle. And what you can do is you can drag your hole onto that center point and it will lock it in for you. And that means that we're now in the center of that rectangle. From there, I'm going to select all as my distance. Now what all does is it means that it cuts through everything in that path. Anything from that sketch going outwards, if there's a body there, it will cut through it. In this case, because there's nothing behind it, it's just going to cut through what we want. Make sure that your diameter is correct. We wanted it 5mm, so that's good. Let's clearly remembered that from before. And click OK. You can see our hole appeared, and we want to add another one in the bottom. So we're going to go in, create a hole, and do exactly the same thing. Click, and then drag it. Oh, there we go. Click, drag it onto our reference point. Now if we select all here, you might notice that it's actually cutting through our second body. Now we don't want this, but as we're on all, as I said, it will cut through anything that it sees in its path. I'm actually going to leave it on all, and I'm going to use the opportunity to show you another feature of a lot of cutting tools in Fusion, and that's the Objects to Cut drop down at the bottom. If you click on the little drop down, you'll see a list of every object that is being cut. So here, at the moment, we only have two bodies in the way, so it's cutting body 1 within the linkage 1 component, which is this one, and it's also cutting body 1 within the leg block component. We don't want it to cut the linkage. We don't want that hole there because we're going to use this hole over here. It just needs to be moved to the right place. So what you can do is you can uncheck the body you don't want it to cut, and it will remove it from the cutting operation. And now you can see that there's no hole being cut there. You can do this with as many objects as are there, but it's just a really useful tool to be able to turn off cutting of certain parts. Click OK, you'll see the hole isn't there, but we do have one where we want it. The next thing we want to do is we want to assemble it. But the first thing we need to do is add new linkages. So we only have 2 of these, so what I'm going to do, activate our leg subassembly over here, and we want another version of each of these for the other side. So I'm going to go in, right click, copy, and then paste into our part. And I'm just going to drag it over to this side. We're going to apply joints in a second to put it in the right place, but for now we're just going to move it, and then we'll apply it to the correct joint a bit later. Click OK. I'm going to do the same thing with our other one. So that's the bottom. Linkage 2, copy, and paste into our leg subassembly main file. Drag it across as before. Now what we want to do is we want to apply a joint that comes between each of our linkages and this hole. Now the way we do this is from the assemble menu. So we've now worked our way through create, modify, and into assemble. Within assemble, you have an option to do a joint. So J on your keyboard. If you click on joint, you'll see that you can select bodies and components to bring together. Now, I just said bodies, that was actually wrong. The main thing that comes with the joints is that you have to only join components. You cannot join bodies. Now, because each of our parts is a separate component, that's not a problem, because we can join components. But be aware that if you're trying to join a body, this won't work. It has to be a component. If, for example, you have a component with two bodies in it and you want to join them, you cannot use the joint tool. So just be aware of that. Now this allows me to select my components, and I want to select our linkage and our main block. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go in, and you'll see if I hover over it, it gives me this disc. It's a half sort of cut through disc. And the aim of the joint tool is to bring the two discs on both parts together. So we'll click a disc on this part, and then we'll click a disc on the next part, and they will come together and be flat against each other. What that means is we want the center of this hole's disc to line up with the center of the hole on this side. So we can go in and click the center of that. You'll see that it hides that part slightly or makes it slightly less opaque. We can't select that again because we can't join it to itself. And we want to join it to the center of this hole. Now we can either select the center of the tube, or we could select the edge from the center of the edge. Now you'll see that that's locked that together. And you might have just seen that animation there where it was revolving around. Now that's what we want, and that's lucky for me because it's clearly the last joint that I applied. But something to be careful of is the motion, well not careful, but something you could change is the motion. So if you go to the motion tab within joint, you have a number of different motion options that you can select. The standard one that probably was automatic for you was the rigid joint, and this is just like if the two parts were welded together. They're completely fixed and they can't move in relation to each other. One we want to use is the revolute joint, which allows them to rotate but not move in any other direction. And you can animate it by pressing the animation. There are a number of others, such as sliders or cylindrical, that allow different ranges of movement, so depending on your application, you might want to choose one of those. In this case, revolute works well. You can also change the axis. Again, Z-axis is perfect for us, but this is what we want. Click OK, and you'll see the joint has been applied. You'll also see in your browser some joints have appeared. So you can go in and you can change, you can find your joints in here if you want to go back and edit. We're going to apply the same to the rest. So I'm just going to go in quickly on there and on this one too. It should save the same motion that you used last time. So this time it's revolute again because we used revolute last time. So let's go in and add all of these joints. Click OK once you're done, and you'll see we've got your 4 joints, and you'll see them in these blue shaded icons. Once you get a load of these, they can get in the way a little bit, so you can always turn them off and make them not visible. I'm going to leave them on for now. So the next part that we need to make is the servo block that goes between the leg and the linkages. So the linkages will attach to the servo block on the other side of these holes. So to create this, we're going to first create a new component, and we're going to call this the servo block. You'll see it appear down at the bottom, and we want to create a sketch that goes between these two parts. We're actually going to do this slightly differently than we did before. We could theoretically create a sketch on this side profile, but in fact I'm actually going to do this slightly differently to show you some other methods that you could use. In this case, we're actually going to create a plane down the middle of this part. If I look at it from the back, we're going to create a plane down the middle here, and then have our extrude go out symmetrically on either side. So to do this, we can go into the construct menu, and this is a load of different ways that you can create construction planes or axes or points. One of the most common you'll use is the offset plane, which allows you to select a surface and bring a plane on from that. But in this case, we're actually going to use the mid plane. The mid plane allows you to select two surfaces, two faces, one on the right hand side there and one on the left, and it will create a plane in the middle of those two. So now we have a plane in the center of our part. From here, we can go in and create a sketch on that part. And you'll also notice that once you've created one of these planes, a construction folder will appear in your component. This is plane 1, and you can rename them if you really want to. You end up with a lot of planes, and you can rename them to make sure you know which one's which. We're going to go in and create a sketch on this plane, look at it from the right hand side, and we're going to draw a rectangle. So I've just pressed R on my keyboard to generate a rectangle, and we want this rectangle to be 60 millimeters deep or down and 80 millimeters long. Once we've done that, we want this to be in the middle of our part here. You can see obviously it's a little bit difficult to see what's going on, and it's very difficult to get exactly correct. So what I'm actually going to do is add a reference point. Now a way that we can do this is by using what's called the project tool. What we want is we want a line about here that allows us to connect our parts. But to do that, we want it to be parallel and the same height as our part that's already here. If you go into the create and then down to project and include, you can select project. It'll bring up this box. And what it allows you to do is select bodies or faces or parts that are already present in your design, and it will create a 2D outline of them on your current sketch. In our case, we want a 2D outline of our main leg block. So we can select bodies rather than specific entities. So specific entities, we can select specific lines or points, but I'm actually just going to select our entire body of our main leg. Now that I've selected that, you can click OK, and you'll see that these purple lines appear. From here, I'm actually going to create a line myself, and I'm going to reference these edge points of our fillet. So if I hover over an area, I can drag out to the side and you'll see these dotted lines appear. And that means that I'm still in line with that point. So I'm going to do one that's in line with that point, click, and I'm going to go down to the next one, the bottom one. I'm going to do exactly the same until it locks into this point. And you can see these two blue, if you look just roughly there, these two blue parallel lines. And what that means is that that part is now parallel to the sketch on the left. You can see it's appeared here, this constraint, and you'll see that there's two of them, and that's because it's parallel to these two lines. This line and this line are parallel. That's an automatic constraint. So that's what we want. The second thing we want is we want it to be 15 millimeters away from our main leg part. So we're going to dimension it with D, click on that line, then click on our projected line, and I can draw a dimension between them. I want this to be 15 millimeters. You can see that that now gets put in place. Finally, because there's a reference line, I'm actually going to make it a construction line just by clicking on construction in the sketch pad. From here, I can use this line as a reference to bring my rectangle in. So what I'm going to use is the midpoint constraint. If you click on the midpoint constraint, you can click on two lines and it will align the middle of both of them. So I can align the middle of this line to the middle of this line, and you'll see that our rectangle is now perfectly in line with our main leg. From here, I want to add in our holes. Now, the bottom hole is going to be exactly where the current one is, and our second hole is going to be slightly offset, so we'll add that in a second. But what we can do is to create our circle here for the extrude. This we can use the project tool again, which is also P on your keyboard. You'll see it come up. Instead of the whole body, this time I just want to specify this specific hole here. And you'll see I can hover over the linkage that's already there. Just to be clear, these aren't parts that have already been sketched. All it is doing is looking at a body that's already there and drawing an outline of it on your plane. Even though our body is over here, you can see that it's drawing the outline on the plane that we are sketching. It's a really useful tool, not only for outlining parts, but also for bringing them onto the correct plane that that you need to sketch on. So I want to specify that hole there. Once I click OK, you can see that that hole appears. And I don't need to draw over this because I can select this area. It's a separate area. You will see it's slightly purple. All projected geometries are purple, and if you want to, you can turn them off in the sketch palette. But we want to keep it on. From here, we want a second circle. So I'm going to press C to draw a circle. I could have gone into the Create menu. I'm just going to draw a circle randomly here, and I want this to be 5 millimeters, same as all the other holes. From here, I can sketch a dimension, or press D, and I can specify the center point of that circle with our sketch point here. And you'll see that I can do a diagonal distance, but actually I want to do a Y and a Z direction. So you can pull it down in the correct direction, and we want this to be 20 millimeters across horizontally, and then we want it to be 30 millimeters vertically. So I can sketch those two dimensions there. Now this hole is in the place that we want it relative to the original hole. Once we've done that, we can finish the sketch, and we can go in, press E for the extrude tool, and select our area, but without selecting the two circles because we want those holes through. Now if I drag this out, you'll see if I look from the top that it's not going both directions, and we want it to be symmetrical on both sides. So what you can do is change the direction in the extrude box to be from one side to symmetric, and you'll see that what this does is it extrudes the distance symmetrically on both sides. Now I want this to move up to our linkage, so what I can also do is I can click on our linkage and it will take it to that distance. Now be aware this is different to the two object, which we don't have in symmetric because you can't have two object on both sides. But what it does mean is that we can click to this place and it will move the extrude up to that distance and then use that as a distance. So it's 25 millimeters, 50 all the way across. We're activated within the servo block, so we want a new body. So press OK, and you can see we have our new body. Now what we want to do is we want to apply the new joints to these holes. And we can use a slightly different hole joint type for this bottom one, because as you can see, it's already in the correct place. What this means is that rather than using a normal joint, where we select the specific parts that we want to be joined, we can go into Assemble and use an as-built joint. And what this does is it allows you to create a joint between two components that are already in their correct positions. So you can select the main servo block component and our linkage component. You'll see two have been selected, and you can currently see that if I animate it, we're on a rigid joint. But if I go into a revolute joint, it allows me to select my axis of revolution, and in this case I want it to be around the center point here. I'm going to do the same on the other side. I'm going to go Assemble, as-built joint between these two components, and I'm going to select my center point here. Now for the top one, I can't use an as-built joint because they're not in their correct locations already. So I'm going to do a normal joint as we did before. And instead of this front surface, I want to select the back surface. But you might notice that it's very difficult to select that back surface because as soon as I move to get that back joint, we don't want it on the front here, we want it on the behind. As soon as I try and get my mouse to that point, it actually selects this front surface instead. So what you can do is when you're hovering over a selection that you'd like, for example these three dots, you can press and hold Control or Command on a Mac, and it will lock you into that selection, which means that wherever I move my mouse, I'm now only limited by these three selections until I let go of Control. And that really allows you to select parts behind. So I can now hold Control and select that back part. And it basically allows you to lock on to specific selections. From here, I want to select this middle hole. Again, if I wanted, I could hover over this area, hold Control, and now wherever I go, I'm locked to this selection. And I can select that middle part. Now I want this to be a revolute joint still, so that's looking good. So I can press OK, and you can see that that's snapped down into position. Do the same on the other side. Joint. We could do an as-built joint, but I'm going to leave it as a normal joint. Again, I held control there because it was behind this part. And I'm going to select this part here, hold control, select the back face. I want that to be a revolute as well. Now that we have our joints all activated, you can see they're all in the right place. So what theoretically we should be able to do is move our part. Now in Fusion, you can just click and drag on a part and it will move. If it doesn't have any joints or constraints, it'll just wander around with your mouse. But in our case, we should be able to move it with a revolute joint. But if I do that, you'll see everything's just moving as one. That's not what we want. So what we want to do is we want to activate everything, and we're going to ground a certain part. Now what grounding does is it is basically telling Fusion 360 that the part you have grounded will be fixed to another part that's not already modelled yet. In this case, our servo block is going to be fixed by our hex bod assembly that we created earlier, by our base plates. But they're not in this model, so we can't represent that. So what we're doing is we click on our servo block, we can right click, and we can select ground. You'll see a little pin appear, and what this is doing is it is grounding that part in place. Grounding means that it is fixed in its place because Fusion is presuming that something else is fixing it later on in the line, and it means you can't drag and move it. But now that this is fixed, you'll see that our other part can move really nicely and smoothly. And all those revolute joints are turning just as they should be. If you've moved something and you want to move it back, you can press Ctrl Z. Or Command Z if you're on a Mac. You might notice that as we move our part, our leg is actually going into our servo body. Now this isn't realistic. Fusion 360 by default allows this to happen because it means that modelling is a little bit easier. But this isn't what will happen in real life. Unfortunately, we can't just morph through parts. But there is quite an easy way to fix this in Fusion 360, and it's called contact sets. Now what contact sets do is it enables contact between two parts, and therefore surfaces cannot go through each other. The way that you enable this is in Assemble. You go into Assemble, you say Enable Contact Sets. This will then appear in your browser, and you can select to All Bodies Contact. Once this is selected, you'll see the icon change, and from there, if you drag your part, you'll see that it stops at the point that it contacts, just here. It won't let me go any further than that, even if I'm trying. There's therefore contact between these bodies. You can specifically add in contacts between specific bodies and not other ones, but in this case we're just going to enable all contact across this file. You'll see it also works at the bottom, so if we try and go below that part, it won't happen. I'm just going to undo, so our part's back in a nice regular place. The next part that we're going to do is we're going to add on a little mounting block to our servo block, or a little mounting hole. So we're going to activate our servo block, and we're going to create a new sketch on the top surface of our servo block. Looking at it from the top, we're going to press C for circle, and I'm going to choose the midpoint of our servo block on the right hand side here. Once I have that midpoint, I'm going to draw a circle of 25mm, and then I'm actually going to draw another circle. I'll be pressing C on the keyboard here to get circle up. I'm going to make this a 5mm hole to match all of our other holes. Now that I have this area that I can extrude down to make a jutting out area for our holes to go through. So I'm going to press E on my keyboard to jump straight into the extrude tool, select that outer area, and then go down and select this bottom area. That part now juts out, and that's exactly what we want. So click OK. But you'll notice here that our extrude has only left a half semicircle, which is not what we want. So we can go back in, re-show our sketch. This one was sketch 2, because automatically Fusion hid it. And then we can extrude and select that other half semicircle. Now so far, most of our extrudes we have created new bodies. The extrude tool can also be used to cut away from a body. So instead of dragging it away from our body, I'm actually going to drag it through our part. And as before, I can select this bottom face, and you'll see that it activates this cut feature going all the way through. You can see on the right that the operation has been selected as cut. This can be used, you can see the red means that it's being cut, and you can use this to cut any kind of shape using the extrude tool. It's a very, very useful tool, and you'll also see the objects to cut, just as we had with the whole tool. Click OK, and you'll see that that's now been cut away. You might have also seen that on the previous part that we made, this one, it was actually, the operation was a join. And what a join means is that instead of creating a new body, in our browser, this is all one body. So instead of extruding and creating a body 2, it actually extruded and recognized that it was touching a body already, and it joined it to that part. And that's why there's no seam line between them here. We can turn that sketch back off, and we have our hole looking nice. Finally, what I want you to do is use the fillet tool to add some fillets to this outside edge. I'm really hoping that by this point you understand the fillet tool a little bit more. We've used it quite a few times. If you don't, potentially go back and take a look at some of those. But what I want you to do is add a fillet and add it to these edges to get a nice even shape. Make sure that you're activated in the servo block so that you're working on the servo block, and add those fillets as you'd like. In the next video, we're going to go in, we're going to make some modifications other than the fillets to some of our parts.